How do you pronounce your last name?
Hakenewerth.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a doozy. I know. That's what happens when you have an Americanized German name.
Hello, everybody. We are here at the Historic Lyric Theater in Lexington, Kentucky with Sunday Night MTG. We have finalist of the Standard Classic in Indianapolis, Andy Hakenewerth. Good to meet you. Good to see you. We've met before. I don't know why I said that, but we're here. We're here having fun, talking Magic. So let's just jump right into it. You were undefeated, #1, got to the finals. Somebody killed the dream, but you had such a great run. So let's talk about this. We're talking about Bant Nexus and just its powerhouse ability.
Okay, so to preface this, when we registered for the Open, our team decided that what we wanted to do was we wanted to have like the most efficient aggro deck that we possibly could, because we felt like playing something aggressive early on in the format was something that we wanted. We learned very quickly that because Arena had their cards out earlier, we struggled a lot against the Sultai midrange decks, which ended up winning the event and was a large majority of the day 2 metagame. We struggled and had mostly unimpressive records. Most of us went 5-3 and did not make the cut for the following day. When we met as a group afterwards, we decided that we wanted to play something in the Classic that was unfair. The majority of our teammates decided that they wanted to play Modern cards, and one of our teammates did end up top 8ing the Modern Classic. 3 of us decided to play Standard. 2 of us were on the exact 75 of the Nexus deck that we were talking about. When we were playtesting Nexus, we wanted to have the most consistent possible set of cards that we possibly could for being able to like not really interact like with our opponent in a counterspell kind of way. There are 2 versions of Nexus that are floating around online. There's the Gift of Paradise Expansion Explosion version, and then there's our version. I didn't enjoy the way that the Expansion Explosion deck worked. It felt more like a ramp deck that was trying to get to that later Expansion Explosion game, whereas I felt that the version that we're playing had more interactive spells in it, and that was the playstyle that I enjoyed, and it ended up being the correct choice for the tournament.
And you talk about there was a case where you actually had your Nexus direct or unmoored egoed, and still ended up winning that. So obviously, without even the namesake of the deck, it has the ability just to sludge through and still win. Outside of Nexus, who was the MVP of the list?
So the strongest card in the entire deck, in the main deck, it was a tie between Hydroid Krasis and Dawn of Hope. The main core of the deck, you cannot change because the deck can't function without them. Your Nexus of Fates, Wilderness Reclamations, Growth Spirals, Chemist's Insight, Teferi Hero of Dominaria. Those cards have to be in the deck in order for the deck to function the way it's supposed to. The cards that were unique to the list that we decided were Hydroid Krasis, Dawn of Hope, a Singleton Anticipate, 4 Revitalize, and 3 Settle the Wreckage. We wanted 2 win conditions in the deck that were not Teferi Hero of Dominaria. They recently changed the rule to the MTR where a Teferi emblem is no longer game ending. Your opponent does not have to concede to having all of their permanents being exiled. So we chose, at first, Dawn of Hope. Dawn of Hope and Wilderness Reclamation go hand in hand like that. When you have access to so much mana and being able to make guys to actually like not only buffer your life total, but use the secondary ability on the Dawn of Hope to pay extra mana to draw more cards, it made the deck a lot more consistent, and it made your Revitalizes, Chemist's Insights, plus gain 3 life, which made the deck a lot more consistent. We also added a Hydroid Krasis to the deck because that card plays a lot like a mini Sphinx's Revelation. It allows you to bridge that gap against the aggressive and the mid-range decks to be able to make it to the late game and also replace itself plus a few cards. So that way you can actually get to a turn where you can Wilderness Reclamation plus Nexus of Fate and then continue to go off from there. And also Search for Iskanta. Search for Iskanta is the best card in the deck, by far. Other than Search for Iskanta, our sideboard was very unique. We decided to play 3 Lyra Dawnbringer, 2 Knight of Autumn, 4 Negates, 1 Disdainful Stroke, and 4 Frilled Mystic. The Frilled Mystics were the best cards in the deck by a large margin. We decided that we wanted to bring that card in against any mid-range deck and every deck that played blue. Reason being is when we were playing without Frilled Mystic on our sideboard, we were getting picked apart by Duress and Negate decks. Every time we would try to do something in a meaningful way, they would either Duress before Settle the Wreckage happened, or they would negate our business spell and we wouldn't really have anything to do. Whereas Frilled Mystic allowed us that tempo advantage where when they went to go commit something to the board and we cast Frilled Mystic, we get to do that thing, and then now the game is suddenly in our favor. Also, not being able to be duressed or negated by their typical permission made it to where we won more games more easily.
Yeah, Frilled Mystic, shout out to Mystic Snake, one of my favorite cards from Apocalypse. It cannot be duressed nor negated, and so yeah, it becomes really strong in that case. Plus it gives you a little body to work with if necessary. I had seen some people using Blink of an Eye to really further abuse that, mainly in Simic builds. So one thing too, so you're Bant, and you seem like to have a very tight list, and you said there was a couple of choices that you weren't a fan of, like the Gift of Paradise builds. They give a little bit too much air and maybe something that's easy to pick off and not allowing you to move forward. What about the other builds, so the Teamer Reclamation and then Simic, that kind of is geared mainly just to churn burn through Nexus without some of the win cons like Teferi?
I feel like those versions of the decks are just a worse version of Bant Nexus. A lot of times when we were testing these Wilderness Reclamation decks, we found that we had an access to a plethora of mana, but we just didn't have anything to do with it. That's part of the main reason why we selected to play cards like Revitalize, Growth Spiral, Settle the Wreckage, because we wanted to have things to do at instant speed in order to best make use of our mana, because the turn that we didn't spend our resources was a turn that we lost. Gift of Paradise a lot of times helps you ramp to the things that you want to do, but it's a very dead draw late, whereas if you draw something like a Revitalize or a Settle the Wreckage, like it's a live draw and then the game continues. Settle the Wreckage was the absolute best choice to play in that deck for that weekend, and I believe it is still the best card you can play, because anytime you can 2-for-1 or 3-for-1 your opponent with Settle the Wreckage, you buy yourself 2 turns. There were a lot of games where I played against red and mid-range decks where I got to Settle the Wreckage them, and then the following turn I went off and then the game was over. So the blue-green Simic version plays the 4 Hydroid Crisis, Memorial to Genius, and can combo off and ramp a little harder. I find that version of the deck has the problem of it really doesn't have a win con beyond the Hydroid Crisis, and just the white splash is free, so you might as well go ahead and have access to those things. The Teamer Reclamation version, you can win with Explosion, but it just feels like a less efficient Teferi Hero Dominaria deck. Murmuring Mystic is the most impressive card in that deck, but it does have the problem of being able to die to more removal, whereas Teferi requires very specific answers, and then you're more set up to protect your win con in the Bant Nexus deck than you are in the Teamer Reclamation deck.
So right now we have Esper, which we'll talk a little bit about the finals matchup itself, Bant Nexus, and of course the winning list Sultai midrange. And you do still have mono red, that is some portion of the metagame, and maybe even a sidecar to that would be mono blue, even though mono red is more popular. Would you agree that that's kind of where we are week 1 metagame wise? And so it's interesting because a lot of times week 1 standard with a new rotation, or not, this wasn't a rotation, this was just inclusion of more cards. But a lot of times that is the prime time for a mono red deck or an aggro deck. And it seemed like this time that the continuation of Bant Nexus was sort of in the queue, but it's gotten stronger. And then with Sultai basically taking the Golgari build and just putting in a little bit of sweetness on top. But a lot of times it's just that week 1 mono red, just mono red deck wins. Why do you think that was the case, that it was a little bit more contained than usual week 1s?
It has everything to do with access to Arena. We've had more time this season than ever to be able to play against these mono red decks and tweak our lists so that way we aren't just a dog in the red matchup. The litmus of the format at the moment is if your deck's bad against red, you shouldn't play it. And then if you can beat red, can your sideboard be tweaked to be able to beat the mid-range and the control decks? Once you're able to do that, then your deck can hang with the bigger dogs. The mono red matchup with this particular deck is actually very favorable. Similar to last season when the Bant Nexus deck was a favorite against the Hakenewerth, the Fervent decks. The reason we built the deck the way that we did was that deck had the added benefit of their cycle lands being able to be additional cards in addition to being land drops. With this version, we have so many cantrips and Anticipate, Growth Spiral, Revitalize that it plays similarly, so that way we can hit our resources on time and interact with the red deck in a meaningful way so we can combo off before they can defeat us. The same way with the Sultai midrange deck, because they don't have any permission in their main deck and their threats are a little slower even though they hit a little harder, it still buys us enough time with Root Snare, Revitalize, and Settle the Wreckage to where we can set up our combo and then win the following turn. Esper by far is the toughest matchup that you can play against, incidentally because Absorb and Mortify actually do something against the deck, and then you draw a lot of dead cards like Settle the Wreckage, Root Snare, and things like that, so you have more dead cards against them than they do against you. I actually did win my match against my Esper opponent, where we talked about earlier, where they did unmoored Ego my Nexus of Fates, and a lot of that has to do with the creatures coming in from the sideboard to being able to actually pressure the opponent and take care of their life total. And it put a lot of pressure on their Mortifies and their Absorbs to allow me to have a whole bunch of resources to be able to do things. I did end up playing mono blue in the Classic. My opponent's deck was definitely geared to be very powerful against mine. My opponent did get unlucky and did draw multiple lands in a row, which allowed me to put a Lyra Dawnbringer into play and then end up closing the game out after that. But I feel like of all the Nexus decks that are available at the time, that this one is the most clean 75 that you can possibly play in a tournament at the moment.
So let's talk about the finals. You were undefeated in Swiss, double draw in, make it to the finals. What was it about that Esper matchup that caused you not to take home the hardware?
So in game one, my opponent saw 3 Absorbs and 3 Mortifies, and then I lost. In game two, I got to enact my game plan and then go off and then win the game from there. In game 3, the reason I lost was because I was lacking the blue source. One of my blue sources had cast Frilled Mystic when I was supposed to, and because I wasn't able to do that, my opponent was able to make constructs with Karn and then be able to pressure me because I no longer had Settle the Wreckages or Root Snares in my deck. I also didn't see Karn in games 1 or 2, but I don't believe it would have changed my sideboarding decisions at all. My opponent was very good. Shout out to Raja Solomon for being a fantastic opponent and a very good Magic player. I did get unlucky, and I believe that if my resources were drawn on time, I believe I would have been the victor of that game.
Yeah, it's always so tough to have that run and then just your deck doesn't quite agree with the curve that it's supposed to have been built to do. But again, it's a tremendous run and incredible. And again, we're having a lot of success here in Central Kentucky. And of course, we're here. Thank you for tuning into Sunday Night MTG. We've got another tournament, not to give out too much because it's just right around the corner, but we have a last chance qualifier for an RPTQ in Louisville. Without giving out too much, what do you think your approach is going to be for this weekend?
I believe that I'm going to continue to play Bant Nexus until they tell me to stop doing it. I think that of all the cards that exist in the format at the moment, Nexus of Fate, Teferi, and Wilderness Reclamation are single-handedly the strongest cards, and you also get Hydroid Crisis. So why not just go ahead and play the deck with the strongest cards until they tell you to stop? Of the list that I'm playing, I'm only going to make a couple of changes to the sideboard. I believe that trimming a Frilled Mystic for an additional Knight of Autumn and trimming the Disdainful Stroke for a Hydroid Crisis is the move for this upcoming weekend, because I believe that a lot of people are going to be copying Davardi's list, and having more non-duressable things in the sideboard is going to help with that matchup a lot.
Yeah, I think that this deck is really powerful, and so the big question on maybe not just my mind, but other people's minds, will Nexus survive the Banhammer?
Absolutely not. I do not believe that Bant Nexus is the most powerful thing to be doing in the format, but I do believe that it creates a lot of non-games with opponents, similar to why Quarkclan Ironworks was banned in Modern. For the most part, you can enact a game plan to beat that deck, and the Bant Nexus deck is very beatable, but it creates a situation where you're taking multiple turns in a row and your opponent is no longer able to play Magic, In addition to that dichotomy, you also have the fact that that it only exists as a promo. You can't get any non-foil versions of this card. Like during the tournament, I had to play Proxied Mountains, so I wasn't even able to actually play my Nexus of Fates in my deck. So if they do ban it, they'll ban it on the virtue of that. But I can also see a world where they don't touch it until after the Pro Tour.
Yeah, and a lot of times with these bans, of course, each tournament that we're talking about, the Classic and then the Open, Davardi wins with Sultai, you get defeated by Esper. So technically, Nexus didn't win a tournament, but I do feel, just with my brief experience on Arena, it does create those, unfun, unfair, unwinnable games for certain deck lists that don't have those answers. There's kind of a moment in which it's very clear that the deck has turned the corner and there's absolutely no way to go back. Once you have, and my personal experience, I was testing out Simic Nexus, which is super frustrating to play on Arena just because of the hold stop and try to do it in a timely fashion. But I literally took 8 turns in a row. And even to me, I was kind of like, what do I do with all this mana? And I was missing even some opportunities just with the time clock. I personally wouldn't miss it in the format, but I do understand that it is not something that I would like to see Standard get into a habit of banning cards all the time. R&D, I think, has done a pretty good job and put us in a situation where we have a very healthy Standard. And so that's my concern with the Nexus card, is that, like you had mentioned, it is only available in promo outside of Arena. Of course, you do have to play with proxies. If you don't keep that card flat or whatnot, even in an F&M style, like that may be a marked card. So there's some merit for it to get banned. I can be on both sides of saying, like, all the people out there, like, free Ferocidon, because what did the dinosaur do to anybody?
Ferocidon would be disgusting in the mono red deck, and I think that a lot of people would struggle hard against it. Sultai Midrange does a really good job of beating up on the mono red deck, because Wild Growth Walker basically not only pressures their life total by getting larger, but also buffers their own. If Rampaging Ferocidon were in the format, then it would just be infinitely worse. I will say that Wizards R&D did a fantastic job of this particular Standard format. This is the first time in a long time that we've had an aggro mid-range control combo Standard. It hasn't been, like, having multiple decks be viable for a tournament is a very unique experience, and I'm okay with the idea of you not having enough sideboard cards in your deck to dedicate to specific matchups and then losing to the one that you didn't prepare for. So the existence of a combo deck in Standard is okay with me. The Bant Nexus deck is slow, so there is a way for the mono red and the mid-range and the control decks to beat up on Nexus. The Nexus deck is missing a card or two in order to be perfect, and I don't think that we should be calling for the sky falling at the moment. But there is a world where, because of the existence of Nexus of Fate, there is a ceiling on the types of cards that Wizards can print. Wilderness Reclamation definitely enables the deck to be very broken and is a lot faster than it probably should be. And we'll just have to keep an eye out on that for sure.
So as we move forward, just to conclude here with our conversation, and thanks, it's been so great to hear your insights. And I think a lot of people out there are always interested in hearing the success and potential pitfalls of a deck. Obviously, you basically won the tournament except for just a few missed draws, and it is viable in any format, any tournament that you could have right now. So week 1 Standard, and as we move into the Pro Tour season and beyond, without any new cards being introduced for several months now, how do you feel that the meta will shift from the few decks that we talked about? Is there something that's sleeping on us? Is there something to be watching for? And for those creative deck builders out there, what would be maybe something to look at and build something around?
So, on the subject of just playing a deck in general, you really need to practice your deck against the gauntlet of decks that you're expected to see, which includes but are not limited to the red aggro decks, the white aggro decks, splash of color. At the moment it's blue because of Deputy Detention and the permission spells. Sultai midrange, straight green-black is still a viable choice. Esper Control, some people still play Jeskai, even though I don't believe that's correct. Blue-Red Drakes, which is currently my pick for the sleeper best deck in the format when played by the best player in the room. Mono Blue Tempo, and the Bant Nexus deck. If I were to take the Bant Nexus deck to a tournament this weekend, I would spend as much time as possible sequencing plays, because another pitfall of that deck is the minute you make a mistake, you lose. Your opponent can capitalize on a missed resource or a missed sequence of your spells, or anytime you waste your mana in that deck, you will lose the game. If you are unsure of the type of deck that you want to play for a competitive tournament, I would personally recommend the Sultai midrange deck, because of the decks in the format, it's currently the least punishing, because Wild Growth Walker and the Explore creatures kind of get you out of a lot of binds that would normally put players in the losing bracket.
Well, so I think we're also going to be inviting you to come play some Paper Magic, as well as do some stream on Arena, crush some souls, crush some dreams. Again, really excited to have you here. It's just been a pleasure talking with some successful runs here in Central Kentucky on Sunday Night MTG. Any last shout outs from you?
Shout out to Devarty for driving me to the tournament. I appreciate that a whole bunch, and convincing me to play the Nexus deck, even though I was dead set on playing mono red aggro. I should just listen to my people a little bit more and stop having middle of the night revelations on what decks I should play. My superpower is choosing the wrong deck for the Open, but choosing the correct deck for the Classic. And I'm hoping to, it's been a long time since I've had a lot of success in the main event of the Open, and I'm hoping that in the next coming months that I'll be able to spike a top 8 with this Nexus deck.
Well, that's the right attitude to have. Always love talking with winners. Thank you so much for your time. And again, thanks for tuning in to Sunday Night MTG. We look forward to seeing you check our streams and more exclusive content coming to you live. So thanks, and until next time, keep winning.